Good afternoon, dear generals, and welcome to an episode of Men Around the Führer, where today's member is a man carved from the oldest, hardest granite of Prussian tradition. His name was Moritz Albrecht Franz Friedrich Fedor von Bock, a name that echoed the military lineage of Germany and a man who, in the cruelest twists of the Second World War, came closer than any other German commander to seizing the very heart of the Soviet Union. Yet his destiny was not forged by victory alone, but by a profound paradox. He was a professional soldier who loathed the politics of the regime he served, and a man obsessed with duty who found his grandest ambitions dashed not by the enemy, but by the will of his own leader. He was nicknamed Der Sterber, the deer, because he believed the highest honor a soldier could attain was to die in service to the fatherland. He was also known as the Holy Fire of Küstrin, an almost mythical designation that spoke to his fervent, unwavering dedication to the German state, a loyalty instilled in him from his earliest days. Fedor von Bock was born on the 3rd of December, 1880, in Küstrin, Brandenburg, now Kostrin, Poland. His roots were deeply embedded in the Prussian military aristocracy. His father, Moritz Albert Karl von Bock, had commanded a Prussian army division during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870–1871 and was later ennobled by Kaiser Wilhelm V for his service. His mother, Olga Helena Franziska von Falkenhayn, had relatives among the Russian aristocracy, and she was the sister of Erich von Falkenhayn, who served as chief of the German General Staff during the First World War. This environment guaranteed his path. At the tender age of 8, Fedor began his studies at a military academy in Berlin, receiving an education that fiercely emphasized Prussian militarism. He was noted as tall and slim, and he carried himself ramrod straight. He was a cultured, educated man who spoke fluent French, some English and Russian, 4 languages in total. Bock possessed ambition and great physical courage, yet some believed him capable without being truly brilliant. At an early age, he developed an unquestioning loyalty to the German state and a singular dedication to the military profession. Largely influenced by his father, he quickly became adept in core academic subjects, including modern languages, mathematics, and history. He would often address graduating cadets at his alma mater, which closed in 1920, repeating his core theme: "The greatest glory that could come to a German soldier was to die for the fatherland." This was the origin of his fiery nickname, Holy Fire of Küstrin. Bock entered the General Staff in 1908 after studying at the Prussian Staff College in Berlin for a year. He joined the Army League, Deutscher Wehrverein, and made connections with future high-ranking officers such as Walter von Brauchitsch, Franz Halder, and Gerd von Rundstedt. In 1905, he married Malie von Reichenbach, a noblewoman with whom he had one daughter. Malie died in 1910. When the Great War erupted in 1914, Bock was a Hauptmann, captain, and served as a staff officer for the Guards Corps on the Western Front. He was later transferred to the Eastern Front with the 11th Army, participating in the Gorlice-Tarnów offensive in May 1915. The following year, he served on the General Staff of the 200th Infantry Division, fighting in the Carpathians and defending against the Brusilov offensive. In 1917, he returned to the Western Front on the General Staff of the German Crown Prince's Army Group. It was during this brutal conflict that he developed his expertise in mobile warfare. For his staff work during the 1918 Spring Offensive, he was decorated with the Pour le Mérite, Germany's highest military decoration, an unusual honor for a junior officer at that time. By 1918, he had attained the rank of major. The war had taught him that even military brilliance could be consumed by attrition and chaos. The collapse of the monarchy and the humiliating terms of the 1919 Treaty of Versailles deeply impacted Bock's sense of loyalty to the crown. Despite the harsh restrictions placed on Germany's military power, Bock remained in the army, rising through the ranks of the post-war Reichswehr. In the early 1920s, Bock was involved in clandestine military activity. General Hans von Seeckt, the chief of the army command, placed Bock in charge of organizing the Black Reichswehr, a secret army created to circumvent the Treaty of Versailles' limit of 100,000 men. This shadow organization, composed of Arbeitskommandos, labor battalions, often wearing Reichswehr uniforms, became infamous for famous murders intended to punish traitors who revealed secrets. Bock, who had chosen Major Bruno Ernst Buchrucker to build the force, was accused during trials of having ordered the killings, or at least having knowledge of the Black Reichswehr's existence and its crimes. Several times Bock denied in court that the Reichswehr ministry had knowledge of the Black Reichswehr or the murders it committed. By 1932, Bock was commander of the 2nd Infantry Division, and the following year, when Adolf Hitler became Chancellor, Bock was one of the most senior army officers. Bock was a traditionalist. He remained an intransigent monarchist. Personally, he disdained Hitler, viewing him as the German equivalent of white trash. However, Bock adhered strictly to the German army tradition of avoiding politics and focusing entirely on military activities. He kept quiet throughout the years of Hitler's rule to maintain his career. He was classified as a non-Nazi rather than an anti-Nazi. When Hitler began reorganizing the armed forces during German rearmament, Bock was one of the officers who was not removed from his post. Hitler was reportedly pleased with Bock's strict militarism, once saying, "Nobody in the world but von Bock can teach soldiers to die." In 1935, Hitler promoted Bock to General der Infanterie and appointed him commander of the 3rd Army Group. By 1938, Bock's command, known as Army Group 3 at Dresden, included 8 infantry divisions and 3 frontier commands, growing to another 3 divisions by October 1937. Bock played a key role in the early expansionist ventures of the Nazi regime. He led the Anschluss invasion of Austria in March 1938, marching into Vienna at the head of the 8th Army. He also played a key role in the annexation of the Sudetenland in 1938. He remarried in 1936 to Wilhelmina von Bock. When World War II began in September 1939, Fedor von Bock was in command of Army Group North for the invasion of Poland. His objective was the destruction of Polish forces north of the Vistula. His force, comprising General Georg von Küchler's 3rd Army and General Gunther von Kluge's 4th Army, struck southward from East Prussia and eastward across the Polish corridor. Bock directed 630,000 men out of the 1,516,000 committed to the invasion. The campaign was brutal, brief, and showcased the revolutionary Blitzkrieg tactics combining speed, coordination, and overwhelming force. In just 5 weeks, Poland was overrun. During this campaign, Bock gave a troubling order on September 10. His forces were to burn Polish villages behind the front line if fired upon from the settlement, provided it was impossible to identify the specific house from which the shots came. By the time the military occupation ended on October the 26th, 531 towns and villages across Poland had been destroyed. Bock was also shocked by how the Schutzstaffel SS treated Jews in Poland, but decided against lodging an official protest. Following this successful campaign, Bock was awarded the Knight's Cross. He was then transferred to the Western Front. By October 12, 1939, Bock commanded Army Group B, tasked with advancing through the Low Countries, the Netherlands and Belgium, to lure the Northern Allied units into an encircling pocket. His force comprised 29.5 divisions, including 3 armored divisions, notably the 18th and 6th Armies. Bock actively pursued forward command principles, sometimes bypassing echelons to ensure momentum. For instance, during the operation in May 1940, he declared, "I cannot allow any opportunity to whip the matter forward to pass by." At Maastricht, He reached past General Walter von Reichenau to stress to General Erich Hübner the vital importance of achieving a rapid breakthrough toward Gem Blue, noting in his diary, "I knew that I wasn't making myself popular, but I had to demand the most." His formations helped encircle the Allied armies at Dunkirk. Bock's troops occupied the Netherlands and, collaborating with Army Group A, crushed the Allied forces in northern Belgium. From a professional standpoint, Bock's methodical execution reflected the ideal Prussian model of command. Precise, relentless, and unemotional. His armies then broke the French defense line over the Somme on June 5, 1940, eventually seizing Paris and occupying the Breton Peninsula. He participated in the armistice with France in late June 1940. In recognition of his distinguished leadership and the lightning demolition of the Allied armies, Hitler promoted Bock to the rank of General Field Marshal, on July 19, 1940. By early 1941, the shadows began to lengthen across the East. Bock, despite his deep reservations about Nazi ideology, was tapped to lead the most critical campaign of the war. On April 1, 1941, Army Group B was redesignated as Army Group Center, here as Gruppe Mitte, in preparation for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. This military campaign, launched on June 22, 1941, aimed to eradicate communism, conquer the Western USSR for German resettlement, Lebensraum, and seize crucial resources like Ukrainian agriculture and Caucasus oil. The overall goal, set by the invasion plan, was the capture of Moscow within 4 months. Bock's Army Group Center was deployed in Poland and was the central prong of the invasion, positioned to follow the route north of the Pripyat marshes straight to Moscow. His command was immense. 51 of the 149 German divisions committed to the operation, consisting of the 4th and 9th Armies, the 3rd and 2nd Panzer Armies, led by Hermann Hoth and Hans Guderian respectively, and Luftflotte II. Before the invasion, Bock had already played a role in Hitler's deception strategy against the USSR. On March 24, 1941, Bock ordered the construction of fortifications along the Soviet border, presenting them as defensive measures against a potential Soviet attack and instructing that the Red Army should not be obstructed from observing these works. The initial phase of Barbarossa proved a spectacular triumph. Using the rapid maneuver of the panzer groups, Army Group Center achieved unprecedented successes in modern warfare during the first 4 months. The objective was to destroy the Soviet armies in massive encirclement battles. Hoth's and Guderian's panzer groups played a pivotal role in the huge encirclements of Soviet armies. In July 1941, Bock's troops captured Minsk and 3 weeks later reached Smolensk. Army Group Center, sometimes coordinating with Army Groups North and South, encircled and destroyed no less than 18 Soviet field armies in under 4 months. Bock's forces advanced 500 miles, inflicting 750,000 casualties and capturing or destroying over 7,000 tanks and 6,000 guns, suffering about 100,000 casualties themselves. Hoth's commander noted that Army Group Center managed to wage battles of annihilation rarely seen in war history, and the victory at Bialystok and Minsk granted the Army Group full operational freedom. Despite this devastating speed, friction with Hitler intensified immediately. Bock felt the key to victory was a direct and rapid drive toward Moscow, believing that maintaining momentum was crucial. By July 1941, after capturing Minsk, Hoth's army had advanced so quickly that Bock requested bypassing Minsk entirely to attack toward Vitebsk and drive straight for Moscow. He recorded in his diary his frustration over strategic disagreements. "We are permitting our greatest chance of success to escape us by this restriction placed on our armor." Hitler, however, insisted on diverting forces for large-scale encirclement battles in the flanks, specifically diverting some of Bock's troops toward Leningrad and Kiev to seize resources and raw materials. Hitler transferred the 3rd Panzer Group to Army Group North and sent the 2nd Panzer Group, Guderian, and the 2nd Army to the south to attack Kiev. Bock thus lost 5 Panzer Corps, 3 Infantry Corps, and most of the 2nd Air Fleet. Bock protested this shift, arguing that each delay weakened the central thrust. The order was overruled by Hitler, who wanted the destruction of large Soviet armies near Minsk first. The delay, which lasted through August and September, proved disastrous. The vastness of the Eastern Front, however, was not the only source of darkness. The war on the Soviet territory escalated into a war of annihilation marked by widespread atrocities. Bock's staff was deeply aware of the brutal conduct of the SS Einsatzgruppen units against Soviet civilians and the systematic mistreatment of Soviet prisoners of war. His subordinate and nephew, Colonel Henning von Treskov, who would become a key conspirator in the 20 July plot, urged Bock to protest these orders, citing that they violated military law and were immoral. Bock, unwilling to risk protesting too loudly, protested up the army chain of command rather than directly to Hitler. When his efforts failed, Bock dropped his protests. In a moment of chilling self-justification, Bock reportedly declared after his envoy returned empty-handed, "Gentlemen, let it be noted that Field Marshal von Bock protested." Moreover, Bock was complicit in the maltreatment of POWs, though he protested their condition. He instructed his troops to transfer Russian prisoners of war out of Army Group Center's military zone to rear areas controlled by the SS and Einsatzgruppe. In effect, he limited his soldiers' involvement in the mistreatment and murder of the POWs while consciously handing them over to their murderers. After the strategic arguments were settled, temporarily, Bock finally received the order on September 9 to prepare the operational order for the assault on Moscow. Operation Typhoon, set to begin by September 30. Moscow was a primary political and military objective for Axis forces. Bock supervised the planning for this massive operation, which included 3 infantry armies, 2nd, 4th, 9th, and 3 tank armies, 2nd, 3rd, 4th Panzers. Army Group Center was heavily reinforced, reaching almost 1.5 million soldiers. Bock stressed that Moscow must be taken by November 7 to coincide with the anniversary of the Russian Revolution before the full onset of winter. The operation began on September 30, 1941, with the armored thrusts of Guderian and Hoth. Bock's armies achieved dual encirclements at Vyazma and Bryansk, resulting in colossal Soviet losses of around 650,000 prisoners of war. Bock estimated that his troops were within 3 to 4 weeks of entering the capital. The German advance had reached 185 miles, 290 kilometers, from Moscow. But as mid-October arrived, the elements turned against the invaders. The autumn rains triggered the Rasputitsa, the period where unpaved roads dissolved into impassable, treacherous mud bogs. German tanks and trucks were stuck, moving sometimes less than 2 miles per day, burning through dangerously low fuel supplies. The entire front became stuck, crippling the German momentum. The advance briefly resumed when the ground froze, and in early November the 9th Army and 3rd Panzer Group swept into Klin and Kalinin, forming the northern spearhead to envelop the capital. By December 1941, German forces reached the outskirts of Moscow, in some cases just 12 miles away. The onset of the ferocious Russian winter brought temperatures plunging below -30°C. Engines froze, weapons jammed, and German soldiers, short on winter clothing and supplies, collapsed in the snow. The logistical catastrophe compounded the fierce Soviet resistance, bolstered by newly raised reserves from Siberia and the Far Eastern military districts. Bock's command became a misery. He realized by December 1 that Moscow could not be taken. On December 6, Stalin launched a massive strategic counter-offensive. Bock urged headquarters to permit tactical withdrawals to stabilize the line, but Hitler forbade any retreat, insisting troops hold. The clash between professional military logic and Hitler's ideological will reached its devastating peak. Bock, exhausted and suffering badly from stomach cramps, ulcers, was effectively at the end of his tether, telling General Holder so by December 5. He was struggling under the enormous responsibility exacerbated by the icy cold, lack of shelter, and heavy losses. Although Bock advised the High Command on December 13 that a withdrawal risked turning into a rout, he still wanted permission to make withdrawals that Hitler refused. On December 18, 1941, Bock was relieved of his command of Army Group Center. The official pretext was Bock's health problems. However, the truth was complex. Bock's outspokenness and Hitler's shaken confidence in his generals following the failure to take Moscow were undeniable factors. This dismissal was part of a purge of roughly 40 high-ranking officers. Bock was replaced by Field Marshal Günther von Kluge. Hitler, assuming supreme command of the army himself, was reportedly generous for once, stating he did not hold Bock responsible for the failure. Yet Bock was subsequently viewed as a scapegoat for the entire catastrophe. Bock's rest was brief. On January 20, 1942, just 30 days after his dismissal, he was reassigned to lead Army Group South in the Soviet Union, replacing Field Marshal Walter von Reichenau, who had died from a stroke. This new command tasked him with halting the first Russian winter offensive in the southern sector. Despite the overwhelming forces he faced, the Soviet Marshal Timoshenko had 32 infantry and cavalry divisions plus 10 tank brigades against the German 7 divisions. The Soviet offensive was halted primarily due to the exhaustion of Russian forces and the deep snow, rather than Bock's strategic maneuvers. In May 1942, Bock faced a major test during the Second Battle of Kharkov. Soviet forces launched a powerful offensive, threatening to encircle German units near Kharkov. Bock orchestrated a masterful defense, successfully repelling the attack and inflicting about 270,000 casualties on Timoshenko's southwestern front. Hitler refused to allow Bock to use reserves in the battle, constantly looking over the shoulders of his field commanders. This success set the stage for the major German summer offensive, Operation Blau. Bock commanded the forces driving towards the Don and eventually the Caucasus oil fields. Bock's armies, including the Second Army, 4th Panzer, and Paulus's 6th Army, achieved stunning successes, utterly shattering Soviet defenses across a wide 280-mile zone. They reached the Don River near Voronezh by July 5. However, the familiar tensions between Bock and Hitler flared up again. Bock wanted to eliminate the newly formed Soviet Voronezh front under Nikolai Vatutin before pushing too deeply east, believing this was necessary to secure his flank. Hitler, displeased with Bock's perceived slowness and overly cautious planning, insisted on a rapid thrust towards Stalingrad. On July 7, 1942, Hitler dramatically split Army Group South into 2 new commands. Army Group A aimed for the Caucasus oil fields under Field Marshal Wilhelm List, and Army Group B covering the northern flank and advancing toward the Volga under Bock. Bock was worried about using unreliable foreign armies, Hungarians, Romanians, Italians, to guard the flanks while Army Group A moved south. Bock also caused several days of delay by using Hungarian troops at Voronezh, which upset Hitler. He delayed sending the 4th Panzer Army south until his left flank was secure. Hitler felt Bock was too defensive and was angered by Bock's deviations from the prescribed plan. Hitler was infuriated when Bock disregarded an order to break off the battle and insisted on securing his flank first. As a result of this direct challenge and the perceived delayed advance, On July 15, 1942, Bock was relieved of his command of Army Group B. He was replaced by Maximilian von Weix. Hitler, having lost faith in Bock, informed Field Marshal Keitel that he could only work with commanders who obeyed his orders strictly. Keitel advised Bock to ask to be relieved due to illness. Bock stepped down, entering the Führer Reserve, and then into retirement for the rest of the war. He never again held a senior command position. This second dismissal occurred because he supposedly tied up the panzer forces at Voronezh for too long. During his retirement, Bock, the quintessential professional soldier, spent the rest of the war living a quiet life in Bavaria. He became disillusioned and sidelined, feeling he had been made a scapegoat for the catastrophe unfolding on the Eastern Front, particularly around Stalingrad. His military professional ethos deeply shaped his relationship with the German resistance. Bock was related to, commanded, or served with virtually every officer who became a conspirator. His own nephew, Henning von Treschow, a cousin of Bock's wife and Army Group Center's chief of staff, became a key figure in the plot to kill Hitler. Treschow tried several times to win Bock over to the anti-Hitler movement. However, Bock held strong views against actively joining a coup. His strong sense of duty and his loyalty to the soldier's oath bound him to serve the state and its leader, even in disagreement. Bock's reluctance also stemmed from a belief that a coup could ignite a civil war. Crucially, the sources indicate Bock held a pragmatic or perhaps cynical political reservation. He refused to participate in any putsch that did not enjoy the support of Heinrich Himmler and the SS. He even advised Treschow to seek Himmler's support, though there is no evidence Treschow followed this advice. Despite his firm refusal to join the active resistance, Bock never reported the details of the plot to the Gestapo. He was informed about the attempted assassination of Hitler on July 20, 1944, but condemned the attempt as a crime. Nevertheless, he tolerated the pronounced resistance sentiments among his own staff, and as a result, he was later considered a traitor by Hitler's sympathizers. As the Third Reich collapsed in the spring of 1945, Field Marshal von Bock watched from the periphery. After Hitler's suicide on April 30, 1945, the new government under Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz was established in Hamburg. Bock, perhaps hoping for a new command or seeking to serve as a functionary in the Flensburg government, offered his services to the interim government. He set out immediately for Hamburg. The final days of his life were tragically ironic. On May 3, 1945, days before the war in Europe officially ended, Bock's car was driving near Lensahn. There it was strafed by a Royal New Zealand Air Force Hawker Tempest fighter bomber from No. 486 Squadron, Rundef. The attack instantly killed his wife Wilhelmina, his stepdaughter Katerina, and a friend's chauffeur driving the car. Bock was the initial sole survivor, but was severely wounded. He was taken to a naval hospital in Oldenburg in Holstein. He died the following day, May 4, 1945, at the age of 64. Fedor von Bock thus holds the unique distinction of being the only German field marshal to be killed by enemy fire during the Second World War. The exact pilot remains unknown. His death, far from the grand battlefields he commanded, was a solitary, tragic twist of fate. He was buried in the Friedhof Lensahn cemetery. In his life, Fedor von Bock embodied the tension between duty and conscience, professionalism, and political fanaticism. He was a man of discipline who achieved technical mastery in command, but ultimately served an ideology that scorned his traditional values. His campaign on Moscow remains a defining episode of the war, a moment when victory seemed within reach, only to be crushed by the unforgiving vastness of Russia and the rigid, often flawed, interference of Adolf Hitler.